The laptop screen flickered to life at 11:35 p.m., and the video file sitting in a folder labeled Vacation Photos 2019 started playing before I even meant to click it. My wife's voice filled my home office, breathless and familiar in a way that made my stomach drop through the floor. "Don't stop," she said. And then I saw him. Wyatt Caldwell. My best friend since the 7th grade, the man who'd stood next to me at my own wedding holding the rings, was on screen with his hands on my wife like he owned her. I didn't throw the laptop. I didn't scream. I didn't wake the house. I sat there in the blue light of that screen for 11 minutes and watched the entire video twice, and somewhere around the second viewing, something in me went very, very quiet. My name is Rowan Voss. I'm 40 years old. I run a commercial contracting company in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I want you to understand something before I tell you what I did next. I am not a man who loses his temper. I've spent 20 years on job sites where one wrong move kills somebody, where you learn to breathe through the panic and think 3 steps ahead before you ever open your mouth. So when I found that video, I didn't confront my wife in the kitchen at midnight. I didn't call Wyatt and scream into the phone. I closed the laptop. I went to bed next to the woman who'd been lying to my face for who knows how long, and I started planning. Because in 6 days, we were hosting Thanksgiving dinner. Her parents would be there. Wyatt's wife would be there. My mother would be there. And I had just decided exactly how this was going to end. I'm Rowan Voss, and before that Tuesday night in November, I thought I had a good life. Not a perfect one, nobody's is, but a good, solid, honest one. I own Voss Builders, a commercial contracting outfit based out of a warehouse off Amnicola Highway in Chattanooga. We do retail build-outs, restaurant renovations, the occasional warehouse conversion. 14 years building that company from a single truck and a set of borrowed tools into something that employs 22 people, and just landed a contract to renovate 3 floors of office space downtown near the aquarium. I'm not a rich man by Chicago or New York standards, but in Chattanooga, with the house I built my wife in the Hickson area, the 2 trucks in the driveway, and a kid heading into his junior year at Hickson High, I had built something I was proud of. My wife Gemma is 42, works as a pediatric occupational therapist at a clinic near CHI Memorial, and for 16 years of marriage I would have told anyone who asked that she was the steadiest, most trustworthy person I'd ever known. We met when I was 23, doing framing work on a renovation of her parents' lake house out near Soddy Daisy. She used to bring sandwiches out to the crew on Saturdays. Her father, Bennett Larkin, ran a small fleet of HVAC service trucks for 30 years before retiring, and he liked me from the start because I showed up early and left late. Gemma's mother, Pauline, used to joke that she married me off before Gemma even knew what hit her. Wyatt Caldwell, though, Wyatt I'd known longer than I'd known Gemma. We grew up 2 streets apart in the same neighborhood off Hickson Pike, played junior league baseball together, got our first beers together behind the Food City when we were 16, using his older cousin's ID. When I started Voss Builders, Wyatt was the first person I called, and even though he never worked for me directly, he sells commercial insurance now, has his own book of clients downtown. He was the guy who helped me move every piece of equipment into that first warehouse. He stood up at my wedding. He's the godfather to my son, Buddy, who's 16 now and doesn't know any of this yet, and God willing, won't have to for a long time. Wyatt married a woman named Sloan 4 years ago, a nurse at Erlanger, sweet woman, quiet, the kind of person who remembers your birthday without being told. I liked Sloan. I liked her a lot, actually, which made everything about that video so much worse, because it wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of her too, sitting at her own dinner table thinking her husband was who he said he was. I want to walk you through that Tuesday, because I've replayed it in my head more times than I can count, trying to figure out if there was a moment, a sign, something I should have caught sooner. The day started normal. I was up at 5:30 like always. Coffee in the blue mug Body made me in shop class freshman year. Out the door by 6:15 to meet my crew at a job site off Brainerd Road, where we were gutting an old furniture store for a new urgent care clinic. Gemma had a full day of patients. Body had football conditioning after school. Nothing about that Tuesday felt different. I got home around 7:30, ate dinner with Gemma, She'd made the turkey chili she always makes when the weather turns, the one her mother taught her. And we talked about nothing important. Whether we needed to get the gutters cleaned before the holiday. Whether Bodhi's grades in chemistry needed a tutor. Normal married people talk. The kind that fills up a life without you really noticing it's the glue holding everything together. After dinner, Gemma went up to bed early, said she had a headache. I went into my home office to finish a bid for a client, a strip mall renovation out near Hamilton Place. My laptop had been acting up that week, freezing during video calls, so I'd been using Gemma's instead for anything that needed a stable connection. I needed to pull up a PDF of architectural drawings that I knew she'd saved to her desktop a few weeks back when she'd helped me organize files, because I am, by my own admission, useless at keeping a digital filing system straight. I opened her laptop, and instead of finding my folder, I found one I didn't recognize, sitting right there on the desktop, labeled Vacation Photos 2019. That struck me as odd immediately, because we hadn't taken a vacation in 2019. Body had a baseball tournament that whole summer, and the year before that we'd done a trip to the Smokies, and the year after was the year everything shut down. There was no 2019 vacation. I almost didn't open it. I want you to know that. I almost just assumed it was some old folder from before we were together, some artifact from her single days that had survived a dozen computer transfers. But something. Call it instinct. Call it the same gut feeling that's kept me alive on job sites for 2 decades. Told me to click it. Inside were 4 video files, no photos at all, which should have been my second clue that Vacation Photos was a lie dressed up as a label. The files were named things like IMG_4471 and IMG_4502, the kind of generic naming a phone gives a video automatically, suggesting these had been downloaded or transferred from someone's phone rather than recorded on a camera that organized things properly. I clicked the first one before I'd even fully processed what I was doing, and that's when I heard her voice come through the laptop speakers, low and unmistakable, saying words I will never be able to unhear. The video was shot in a hotel room. I recognized the bedspread, the particular shade of taupe, and the headboard design, because Voss Builders had done renovation work on that exact hotel 2 years back. The Reed House downtown, a renovation of the 4th floor suites. I knew that room because I had personally walked the punch list on it. My wife was in a bed I had helped renovate with a man I had known since I was 11 years old, and the date stamp in the corner of the video read August of that year. 3 months earlier. Not 2019. 3 months. I sat in that office chair for what felt like a long time. I'm an engineer-minded person, even though I never finished my engineering degree at UT Chattanooga before I dropped out to start the business. I think in systems, in sequences, in cause and effect. So even as my hands had gone cold and my chest felt like someone had set a cinder block on it, part of my brain was already doing math. 4 videos. If they were spread out the way the file names suggested, this wasn't a one-time mistake born out of too much wine at some conference. This was a pattern. This was a relationship running parallel to my marriage, conducted by 2 people who had spent 16 years sitting across from me at Thanksgiving, at Bodhi's birthday parties, at Sunday dinners at my mother's house. I watched all 4. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, because I think the honesty of that matters to this story. I needed to know the scope of what I was dealing with before I decided what to do about it. The earliest one was dated in May, the most recent in October, just 3 weeks before that Tuesday night. 6 months at minimum of an affair between my wife and my best friend, conducted in a hotel room I had personally helped build. I closed the laptop sometime after midnight. I did not wake Gemma up. I did not call Wyatt. I sat in the dark of my office, and I want to be honest with you about what I felt. Because it wasn't just rage, though God knows there was plenty of that boiling under the surface. It was a strange, cold clarity. 20 years of running job sites teaches you that the worst thing you can do in a crisis is react immediately. The building's on fire. You don't run into it. You assess. You find the exits. You figure out who's where, and then you move. I treated that night like a structural failure I needed to map before I could fix it. I didn't sleep, not really. I lay next to Gemma, who slept soundly beside me like nothing in the world was wrong. and I stared at the ceiling and built a plan in my head, piece by piece, the way I'd build a renovation timeline. By 4 a.m., I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew exactly when I was going to do it. In 6 days, on Thanksgiving, my house would be full. Gemma's parents, Bennett and Pauline, would drive in from their place near the lake. My mother, Deborah, would come from her condo over in East Brainerd, the same condo I'd helped her downsize into after my father passed 4 years back. And Wyatt and Sloan would be there too, because they always were. 14 years of Thanksgivings together, Wyatt carving the turkey beside me at the counter, while we argued about Tennessee football, Sloan and Gemma in the kitchen laughing over the green bean casserole. It was the one dinner of the year where every person who mattered to my life, and apparently every person who'd been lying to me, would be sitting at the same table. I am not a man who believes in scenes. I don't like raising my voice. I've fired employees calmly and quietly in my truck rather than in front of a crew, because I think dignity matters even when you're delivering bad news, even when someone deserves worse than dignity. But I also know something about myself that took me 40 years to fully understand. When I am pushed to the edge of what I can carry quietly, I don't explode. I build. I had 6 days, and I was going to build the most precise, devastating, undeniable confrontation of my life, and I was going to do it without raising my voice a single time. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's important to understanding who I am. I drove to the Brainerd Road site. I walked the framing crew through the day's schedule. I took a call from the urgent care client about tile selections, and the entire time, a part of my brain was running a separate, silent operation. During my lunch break, sitting in my truck in the gravel lot behind the job site, I called a man named Garrison Pruitt, a private investigator I'd used twice before for due diligence on subcontractors who'd burned other GCs in the past, checking liens, checking criminal history, the kind of background work that protects a business from getting into bed with the wrong people. Garrison had an office above a barbershop on McCallie Avenue, and when I sat down across from his desk that Wednesday afternoon, I slid my phone across to him with the 4 videos already copied onto it. "I don't need you to confirm what I already know," I told him. "I need you to find out how long, how often, and whether there's anything else I don't know about." Garrison, a heavyset man in his late 50s with the kind of weary patience that comes from 25 years of seeing people's worst moments, looked at the screen for maybe 10 seconds before he set the phone down gently, like it was something that might break. "I'm sorry, Rowan," he said. And then, because he was a professional and not a friend offering comfort, he got down to business. "Give me 4 days. I'll pull hotel records, credit card activity if I can get access, phone records if your wife's name is on a joint account. I'll build you a full timeline." I told him I had until Thanksgiving. He said that was enough time. I paid him in cash, the way I always did, and I drove back to the job site like I'd just stepped out for a sandwich. Over those next few days, I became a different kind of person inside my own house, one that Gemma never noticed, because I am, it turns out, a very good actor when the stakes are high enough. I came home at the same time. I ate dinner at the same table. I asked about her day, and she told me about a kid she was treating with fine motor delays, and I nodded and asked good follow-up questions, all while knowing she'd spent some portion of that same week likely texting Wyatt under the table. I slept next to her. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings. Every single thing I did was real, in the sense that I performed it convincingly, and false in the sense that the man performing it had already, emotionally, left the marriage the moment that video started playing. Garrison called me back on Saturday morning, 2 days before Thanksgiving. I met him at a Waffle House off Shallowford Road, away from anywhere Gemma or anyone in my circle might recognize me, and he laid out a manila folder on the table between the syrup dispenser and the napkin holder like he was presenting evidence in a courtroom, which, in a sense, he was. The timeline was worse than I'd let myself imagine. The affair had started not in May, as I'd assumed from the video dates, but in February. 9 months. It had begun, according to phone records Garrison had been able to access through channels he didn't fully explain to me, and I didn't fully ask about, the week after Wyatt and Sloan had hosted a small dinner party where Gemma had stayed late, helping clean up while I'd taken Bodhi home early because he had a curfew for a tournament the next morning. 9 months. 41 documented instances of contact outside of normal social overlap. Hotel stays, an unusual number of client lunches on Gemma's calendar that didn't match any actual clients at her clinic. Voice memos Wyatt had apparently sent her that a competent forensic pull had managed to recover fragments of. I sat in that booth and drank black coffee and didn't say much while Garrison talked, because I was doing the math again. The same cold systems thinking that had gotten me through that first sleepless night. 9 months meant this wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a second life. This was my best friend and my wife building something secret and sustained while standing next to me at my son's football games, while sitting across from me at Sunday dinners, while Wyatt clapped me on the shoulder at the company's 10th anniversary party last spring and told everyone in earshot that I was the most loyal son of a bitch he'd ever met. "There's one more thing," Garrison said, sliding a single printed page across the table. It was a screenshot of a text message, recovered from a backup, dated about 3 weeks earlier, the same week as that final video. Wyatt to Gemma. "Rowan still has no idea. We just have to get through the holidays and figure out next steps after. I can't keep doing this to Sloan either." I read that sentence 4 times. We just have to get through the holidays. They were planning to sit at my table, eat my mother's stuffing, watch Bodhi show off his new highlight reel from the football season, and act like everything was fine, all while quietly working out how to blow up 2 marriages on their own timeline, in their own way, after they'd gotten what they wanted out of one more Thanksgiving of looking normal. That settled it for me. If they wanted one more performance of normalcy, I was going to give them a performance they'd never forget. I spent Saturday night and most of Sunday building what I started calling, in my head, the presentation. I am, after all, a contractor. I know how to put together documentation that's airtight, that leaves no room for argument, because in my business, a vague claim gets you laughed out of a dispute, but a clear timeline with dates, evidence, and documentation wins every time. I took the 4 videos and trimmed them, not to make them more dramatic, but because I didn't want my mother or Gemma's parents seeing anything more graphic than necessary. I wasn't trying to humiliate Gemma in front of her family in some pornographic way. I wanted the truth on the table, full stop, undeniable, but I had no interest in cruelty for its own sake. I clipped each video down to 10 or 15 seconds, enough to show the room, show both their faces clearly, show the date stamp, and nothing more. I laid the text messages out in a slideshow, the most damning ones, including the one about getting through the holidays. And I built a simple timeline graphic, the kind of thing I'd normally use to show a client how a renovation schedule worked, except this one was titled, simply, February to November. I have a 65-inch television mounted in my living room, the one we use for football on Sundays, and for Bodhi's video games, hooked up through an HDMI switch to an Apple TV. It's also, conveniently, the same screen Gemma's family has been using for years to watch the National Dog Show every Thanksgiving morning before dinner, a tradition her mother Pauline insists on. I knew exactly how to route a laptop into that system, because I'd done it 100 times for our March Madness parties. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of crisp Tennessee fall day that makes the whole city smell like wood smoke. I got up early, same as always, and I want to tell you something strange. I felt calm. Not the calm of a man who's made peace with something, but the calm of a man who has built a thing so carefully that he trusts it completely. The same feeling I get walking a finished job site the day before a client walkthrough, knowing every detail has been checked twice. Gemma was up by 8, moving through the kitchen with the easy competence of a woman who'd hosted this dinner a dozen times before, pulling the turkey out to let it come to room temperature, starting the cornbread for the dressing her mother taught her to make. Bodhi wandered down around 9 in his football hoodie, grabbed a piece of bacon off the stove, and asked if Wyatt was bringing the cornhole boards again, because he and Wyatt usually played around in the driveway before everyone sat down to eat. "I think so," I told my son, and I felt something twist hard in my chest, because Bodhi loved Wyatt. Bodhi called him Uncle Wyatt. There was no version of today that wasn't going to break something in my son's understanding of the people he trusted, and that, more than anything else, almost made me reconsider the whole plan. Almost. Gemma's parents arrived first, around 11. Bennett carrying in 2 pies from the bakery on Hickson Pike that Pauline swears by, both of them warm and easy the way they'd always been with me. Bennett shook my hand, told me the Vols had a real shot this year if the defense held up, and I shook his hand back and told him I hoped he was right, all while knowing that in a few hours I was going to show this kind, trusting man video evidence of his daughter's affair on the big screen in my living room. My mother, Deborah, arrived next, 71 years old and sharp as ever, immediately taking over a corner of the kitchen to help with the rolls, fussing over Bodie's growth spurt, asking me twice if I looked tired, because mothers always know something's off even when they can't name it. Wyatt and Sloan pulled into the driveway at noon. I watched through the front window as Wyatt got out of his truck, carrying the cornhole boards under one arm and a case of the IPA he always brought, laughing about something with Sloan as they walked up the path. He looked exactly the way he'd looked 1,000 times before at my house, relaxed, familiar, like a man with absolutely nothing weighing on him. I opened the door before he could knock and we did the half-hug, half-handshake we'd been doing since we were teenagers. "Happy Thanksgiving, brother," he said, and the word brother nearly made me lose the calm I'd spent 6 days constructing. I held it together. I told him Happy Thanksgiving back. I took the beer from his hands and put it in the fridge myself. Dinner came together the way it always did, this loud, warm chaos of too many dishes and not enough counter space. Pauline directing traffic in the kitchen. Bennett and I carrying the leaf into the dining table to make it big enough for 9 people. Bodie setting the table because Gemma had trained him well over the years. Sloan brought in a sweet potato casserole with the marshmallow topping toasted just right, and she hugged me at the door, the same warm, genuine hug she always gave, and I had to look past her shoulder for a second and breathe, because the thing I kept thinking, over and over, was that in a few hours, this woman's entire life was going to come apart, and none of it was her fault. We sat down to eat around 2 o'clock. Bennett said grace, the same simple grace he always said, thanking God for family and for health and for another year together, and I sat there with my head bowed and my eyes open, watching Gemma across the table laughing at something Pauline said, watching Wyatt reach for the cranberry sauce, and I thought, this is the last meal these 2 people eat, as the versions of themselves everyone at this table believes them to be. The meal itself was, on the surface, completely normal. Bodie told a long story about a chemistry experiment that had nearly set off the fire alarm at school. Bennett and I argued good-naturedly about a Titans game from 2 weeks back. Deborah asked Sloan how things were going at Erlanger, and Sloan talked about a new wing they'd opened in pediatrics. Gemma and Wyatt sat 2 seats apart from each other, careful, appropriate, the way they'd always positioned themselves at family gatherings, and I realize now, watching with new eyes, that the careful distance itself had probably been deliberate for months. A small daily performance of propriety neither of them had even had to think about anymore. They were so practiced at it. After the meal, while the women started clearing plates and the pies came out, I did what I always do. I told everyone to go relax in the living room, that I'd handle coffee, that the dog show should be starting soon if anyone wanted to catch it before dessert. This was Pauline's cue, every single year, to settle into the recliner and turn on the television. I'd already set everything up the night before, the laptop connected, the file ready, hidden in a folder I'd simply labeled coffee on the desktop, because I have a dark sense of humor that apparently doesn't disappear even in the worst moments of your life. Everyone settled into the living room. Bennett and Pauline on the couch, Deborah in the armchair, Bodie cross-legged on the floor near the TV stand the way he'd done since he was a kid. Sloan curled into the other end of the couch, Wyatt standing near the fireplace with a coffee mug in hand, and Gemma walking in last, drying her hands on a dish towel. I stood by the television, remote in hand, and I said calmly, "Before the dog show, I want to show you guys something. Won't take long." Nobody thought anything of it. Why would they? I'd shown this family vacation slideshows before. Bodie's football highlight reels, the drone footage from a job site that had impressed everyone at last year's dinner. I clicked the remote. The screen lit up. I started with the timeline graphic, simple white text on a black background. February. The room was still chatting, half paying attention, the way people do when they think they're about to watch something mildly interesting and unimportant. Then the first photo I'd pulled from Garrison's file appeared. A hotel receipt, the Reed House, dated in February, paid for on a card that wasn't mine or Gemma's joint account, but a separate one Wyatt apparently kept for business expenses. I watched, out of the corner of my eye, Gemma's face change first. The color left it in about 2 seconds flat. Wyatt's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. "Rowan? What is this?" Gemma said, her voice already cracking at the edges. But I didn't answer her. I let the slideshow keep moving. The next slide was a text message, Wyatt's name at the top, dated in March. "Can't stop thinking about last night." Pauline's face turned toward her daughter, confused, the beginning of understanding starting to dawn. Bennett set down his coffee very slowly, the way a man does when his body understands something before his mind catches up. And then the first video clip started to play. 10 seconds. The hotel room I'd renovated with my own crew. Gemma's voice clear and unmistakable in a quiet house that had gone completely, totally silent, except for that sound. "Turn it off," Wyatt said, his voice cracking, lunging toward the remote in my hand. But I stepped back, calm, steady, the same way I'd stand my ground on a job site when a subcontractor tried to bully their way out of a mistake. "We're not done," I said. The second clip played, then the third. I'd built the slideshow to move through the full 9-month timeline, each piece of evidence stacking on the last, the text about getting through the holidays, appearing right as Sloane made a sound I will never forget for the rest of my life, a kind of strangled gasp, like the air had been physically pulled out of her chest. She looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at the floor. Deborah, my mother, had gone completely white, her hand pressed flat against her chest. Body. And this is the part that still keeps me up some nights. Body had gone very, very still on the floor, looking up at the screen, and then at his mother, and then back at the screen, 16 years old, and watching his entire understanding of his family collapse in real time on a television he used to play video games on. The slideshow ended on a final slide, simple, white text. 9 months, 41 documented instances, February to November. And then the screen went black, and I set the remote down on the mantel, and the room was so quiet I could hear the turkey fryer still cooling in the backyard. Gemma was crying now, full sobs reaching toward Bodhi, who flinched away from her in a way that broke something in me even through all my anger. Wyatt was standing by the fireplace looking like a man who'd just watched his entire life detonate in front of the only people whose respect he actually cared about. Sloane stood up from the couch slowly, deliberately, walked over to where Wyatt stood, and I watched her. Quiet, gentle Sloane, who I'd known for 4 years and never once heard raise her voice. Slap him across the face so hard the sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. 41 times, she said, her voice shaking but clear. 41 times you came home and let me make you dinner. Bennett stood up next, walked over to where his daughter sat crumpled on the arm of the couch, and I watched a man I'd known and respected for 16 years look at his own child with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not rage, but a kind of bottomless disappointment that was somehow worse than rage. "How long has this been going on, Gemma?" he asked, and his voice was so quiet, so controlled, that it cut deeper than shouting ever could have. "Daddy, please," Gemma started, but Bennett just shook his head and turned away from her, walked over to where I was standing, and put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, son," he said. "I'm so sorry." And in that moment, with everything falling apart around us, I think that was the first time since I'd watched that video 6 days earlier that I let myself actually feel something other than cold, calculated resolve. I felt grief. Real, simple grief. For the marriage I'd thought I had. For the friendship I'd thought was unbreakable. For the family dinner table that would never again be the easy, uncomplicated place it had been an hour earlier. Deborah, my mother, who does not cry easily, had tears running down her face, but her voice when she spoke was steady. "Wyatt Caldwell, you've sat at this table for 14 years, she said. 14 Thanksgivings. And you did this to my son, and to that woman," she pointed at Sloane, "in his own house. Wyatt didn't say anything. There was nothing for him to say. What do you say to a room full of people who just watched 9 months of betrayal laid out frame by frame on a television screen? Gemma tried one more time, reaching for me now instead of body. Rowan, please. Let's talk about this privately. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. And that's when I finally spoke. The first real thing I'd said since I started the slideshow. You didn't think about privacy for 9 months, I said. You didn't think about me or Bodie or Sloan or any of these people for 9 months. You only started caring about privacy the second you got caught. I wasn't yelling. I want to be clear about that, because I think the fact that I never raised my voice the entire afternoon is part of what made it land the way it did. Calm has a way of cutting deeper than rage ever could. Sloan was already gathering her purse, her hands shaking, and she looked at me before she walked toward the door. Thank you, she said, quietly, just to me. I needed to know. I'm sorry it had to happen here, but I needed to know. Wyatt followed her out, calling her name, and she didn't turn around once, just got in the passenger seat of his truck and stared straight ahead while he backed out of my driveway for what I knew, and what turned out to be true, was the last time. The rest of that afternoon was its own kind of devastating quiet. Pauline took Gemma into the guest room to talk, or to cry, or both. Bennett sat with me on the back porch for a long time, not saying much, just sitting with me in the cold November air, while the leftover turkey sat untouched on the counter inside. My mother took Bodie out for a drive, just the two of them, because she said the boy needed air and space, more than he needed to sit in a house that suddenly felt like a crime scene. I sat on that porch with my father-in-law, a man who'd lost a daughter's trustworthiness in his eyes that same afternoon, and at some point he said, I built HVAC systems for 30 years, Rowan. You know what I learned? A system fails slow, then it fails all at once. You probably saw the slow part before any of us did. I didn't say anything back. I just nodded, because he wasn't wrong. In the weeks that followed, the practical machinery of an ending took over, the way it always does once the emotional explosion settles into ash. Gemma moved out within 10 days into a small apartment over near Northgate, because even though it was my name on the mortgage and I'd built half the renovations in that house with my own hands, I wasn't interested in being the one who left. Bodie split time between us, which was its own slow, painful negotiation, a 16-year-old boy trying to figure out how to look his mother in the eye while also needing her, the way kids do no matter what their parents have done. Wyatt and Sloane's divorce moved faster than ours did. She filed within the month, and from what I heard through mutual friends, she got the house, and Wyatt moved into a corporate apartment downtown and lost 2 of his biggest insurance clients within the year, men who'd been friends of mine first and who, when the story made its way around certain circles in Chattanooga the way these things do, decided they didn't especially want to do business with a man who'd do that to his oldest friend. I won't pretend the months after that Thanksgiving were anything but hard. There were nights I sat in that house alone, after Bodie had gone to his mother's apartment for the week, surrounded by a kitchen I'd remodeled with Gemma's input, a living room with a television I now associated with the worst afternoon of my life, and I wondered if I'd done the right thing. Doing it the way I did, in front of everyone, instead of quietly, privately, like Gemma had begged me to in that first awful minute. But then I'd think about that text message, we just have to get through the holidays, and I'd remember that they were planning to use my mother's stuffing and my son's football highlights as cover for one more month of lying, and the doubt would settle back into certainty. Bodie struggled the most, understandably. There was a stretch of about 2 months where he barely spoke to either of us, where his grades slipped, where I'd find him sitting in the garage some nights just staring at nothing. I got him into counseling with a therapist out near Hamilton Place who specialized in teenagers from split families, and slowly, the way these things go, he started to come back to himself. He's a junior now, working hard, talking about maybe studying engineering, and he and I have an easier relationship than I expected we would, built mostly on the fact that I never once badmouthed his mother to him, even in the worst of it. He needed to be allowed to love her and be angry at her at the same time, and I tried to give him room to do both. Gemma and I finalized the divorce about 8 months after that Thanksgiving. We were, by the standards of these things, civil about it. I didn't try to bury her financially, even though Garrison's file and the very public nature of how everything came out gave me more leverage than most men in my position would have had. I let the lawyers handle the practical math of a 16-year marriage, and I focused what energy I had left on staying steady for Bodhi. Gemma tried to reach out to me a handful of times in those months, not to win me back exactly, but to understand, I think, why I'd done it the way I did. I only really answered her once. I told her that I'd spent 6 days building a case the way I'd build anything else in my life, carefully, with evidence, with a plan, because that's who I am, and I wasn't going to let the worst thing that ever happened to me turn me into someone who handled it sloppily. She didn't have a response to that. I don't think there was one to give. As for Wyatt, I haven't spoken to him since that afternoon, and I don't expect I ever will again. Word travels in a city the size of Chattanooga, even one as spread out as this one, and from what I understand, he's still here, still selling insurance, rebuilding a client list that took a serious hit, living alone in an apartment off Gun Barrel Road. Sloan, from what mutual friends tell me, moved to Knoxville about a year later to be closer to her sister, started over completely, and is apparently doing well, which is the only piece of this whole story that gives me any real peace when I think about it. She didn't deserve any part of what happened to her, and if there's one thing I'd go back and change, it would be finding a way to warn her privately before that Thanksgiving, instead of letting her find out the same brutal way everyone else did. That's the one piece of guilt I still carry, if I'm honest with you. People who've heard this story ask me sometimes if I regret doing it the way I did. The slideshow, the big screen, the audience of people who loved us both. I've thought about that question more than almost anything else in my life, and the answer I keep coming back to is this. I didn't do it for revenge, even though I understand why it looks that way from the outside. I did it because for 9 months, 2 people had been performing a lie in front of everyone who mattered to me, and I refused to let that performance continue one more day, especially not dressed up as one more cozy family Thanksgiving while they quietly planned their exit on their own terms. If I'd confronted Gemma privately in the kitchen that first night, she would have had time to build a story, to soften it, to manage the narrative the way people do when they're caught. Doing it the way I did stripped all of that away. There was no negotiating with the truth once it was up on that screen in front of her own parents. My company is doing better than ever now. We landed that downtown office contract, and I just signed papers last month on a second warehouse space over near East Ridge, because the work hasn't slowed down even though my personal life turned upside down. Bodhi and I have Sunday dinners now, just the 2 of us usually, sometimes with my mother, and we've started our own small tradition of grilling out even when it's cold, because he says the house feels too quiet otherwise, and honestly, so do I. Thanksgiving this past year, the first one since, we kept it small. Just me, Bodhi, my mother, and Bennett and Pauline, who, to their enormous credit, never once let what their daughter did change how they treated me. Bennett still calls me son. We didn't turn on the dog show. Nobody mentioned it. But I think we all silently agreed that some traditions needed a year to heal before we touched them again. I think about that night a lot, sitting in my office with that laptop open, 11 minutes of video that ended one life and started another. I think about how close I came to handling it differently, to screaming, to packing a bag and leaving without a word, to confronting Wyatt in some parking lot the way men in movies do. And I think, honestly, that the version of myself that built a careful, patient 6-day plan instead is the version of myself I'm proudest of, even on the hardest nights. Because here's what I've learned, the thing I'd want anyone watching this who's sitting with their own version of that laptop screen to understand. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to destroy yourself to make sure the truth gets told. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm, gather everything you need, and let the truth speak for itself in a room full of people who deserve to hear it. I built my whole career on the idea that if you do the work carefully enough, the structure holds. Turns out that's true for more than just buildings.